content co-chairs for GES 2011. Thank you all so much for joining us for the closing keynote of the 2011 Global Engagement Summit. Whether you attended one of our short talks, facilitated a workshop, inspired us as a delegate, or encouraged us as part of the GES team, GES 2011 would not have been such a phenomenal success without your support.
For those of you who don't know, GES is a 5-day training conference for students committed to global change. Delegates come together each year from around the world with projects and leave with tangible skills, strategies, connections, and outcomes to move beyond good intentions.
As content co-chairs, one of our most important tasks this year was to choose the closing keynote, and we had a very specific idea in mind. We searched for hours, we scoured dozens of bios, and we watched thousands of TED Talks. In a world where there's so much noise about making change and making a difference, fixing global problems, David Bornstein is someone who made sense of it all. We knew we had found the perfect keynote. So we sat down together, selected our words precisely, read and reread our invitation, held our breath, crossed our fingers, and hit send.
The response we received was an unexpected yet pleasant surprise. David challenged us with compelling questions which we had never been asked before. And we were charged and ready to share your stories and ours. Before he even arrived on campus, David pushed us to think hard about our mission, our purpose, our goals, to define GES.
As a New York Times columnist, author, and founder of Dowser.org, David writes about emerging trends in the field of social entrepreneurship as they occur. David is uncovering stories of change in every aspect of his work. He inspires people to act. He recognizes that this hunger for change and a dramatic improvement in social conditions is not an idealistic trend, but a growing movement that deserves attention and cultivation.
There are people in this room today who are developing their ideas. And there are others who have already implemented their projects across communities across the world. But all of us are here today to learn about our identities as changemakers. David works tirelessly to recognize efforts like yours, and we couldn't be more thrilled to host him as our closing keynote for GES 2011. Please join us in welcoming David Bornstein.
Thank you very much. Totally lovely. It's really it's such a thrill to be here. I haven't been doing very many talks in the past year or two because I've been trying to do some more writing and also stay home because I have a seven-year-old son. But these guys were very, very compelling, and I could not say no. And they were not the highest bidders, by the way. So I have some crib notes here because I actually have done something I haven't done in a long time. I had to pull 2 all-nighters last week because I had 2 columns due around the same time, and then there was a sort of vacation in between. So I'm sort of operating on caffeine right now. So I have my notes here, just in case I forget or I blank out completely. But what I'd like to talk about is sort of the historical moment. And I was just saying before that it's very, very different. I was thinking back when I graduated from college. I went to McGill and I graduated in 1985. And I really had only 4 ideas of things that I would want to do when I graduated. And it was very clear. I was either going to, Windows was released in 1985, so it was this big change in terms of the potential of computers. And I thought I would either get a job in a computer company en route to starting my own computer company, become a constitutional lawyer, and I applied to law school, or perhaps maybe go into medicine or something like that. I was sort of thinking about that. I ended up going into computers and working in that for 4 years. And really my goal at that time was just to make a lot of money. I had never thought of the world of social change. I grew up in a community where what was successful was having a country house in the Laurentians north of Montreal and being able to go to Florida or the Bahamas for Christmas holidays. It was pretty clear what was successful. And so I went into the computer world, and I did that for 4 years. My brother had been in it. He was quite successful. And after 4 years, I realized I felt like I was living my life through my father's eyes or through someone else's eyes, which is to say that I was on a path that I felt I kind of had to be on in order to sort of get all these things that had been laid out in my community that was successful. And I had a girlfriend at the time who was an actress, and she was totally unconventional, and she was unsuccessful on the terms of my community, which is to say she did not make a lot of money, but she always was very happy because she was always doing things that she loved that really turned her on. And the people that she worked with were great friends, and I thought, wow, to be working on a project that you're totally invested in, to be working with people that you couldn't get enough of, those were some of the things that were missing in my life. So I kind of stepped away from the computer world, and I traveled for a year, 365 days with a backpack, just to kind of see the world. And then I decided through that experience that I liked writing, and so I decided to quit computers and move to New York City and become a journalist. And I did that. I did a master's, and then I started working for newspapers in New York. And journalism is not at the time when I was writing, most of the stuff that I was writing about in New York, I was basically covering crime, a lot of murders. I covered probably 20 or 30 crimes or murders and things like that. I was covering a lot of politics. I would venture to say that 95% of the stuff that I wrote about was essentially negative information. It was information that was telling people the world is lousy, and by the way, it was also nothing new. You already knew these things were happening. And so I ended up thinking after 2 years into my second career that I had made another bad decision of a career, and what am I going to do now, sort of 8 years out of college. But that's when I heard about the Grameen Bank, and at the time it was not very well known. How many people here know about the Grameen Bank? I hope everyone. Okay. Is there anybody who doesn't know about the Grameen Bank? Put up your hands if you don't. Don't be shy. Okay, so the Grameen Bank is the organization that pioneered microfinance, small loans to villagers in Bangladesh, as a way to help people get out of poverty. And this approach now, of course, has spread around the world. There's more than 150 million people who get microloans. And there's a whole industry around whether or not and how microloans can help people move through poverty. At the time, this didn't really exist. And so I went to Bangladesh to see if it was really working, if you could and I spent a year in villages in Bangladesh. And my question was, is it possible to build an organization that alleviates poverty? How do you do something like this? Why is it the same thing as what the United Nations does or what the World Bank does? And if so, how does it actually work? How would you actually do something like that? And having studied business, it was sort of an interesting business challenge to me, like how would you lend money to people in villages, and crossing, where the bank workers have to cross bamboo bridges and sit cross-legged on the floor on cane mats, dealing with women most of the time who couldn't read or write. And I came away from that experience after having done the computer stuff and the journalism stuff. I have to say, it completely changed not only the sort of the trajectory of my life, but it gave me a feeling about what could happen in life that I hadn't had before. I hadn't quite had a sense that things could be, this is sort of a dumb word to use, but so cool. It was just really amazing to see and to talk to these villagers and to spend a year interviewing people and to kind of get a sense of, also a deep sense of gratitude for how amazing the opportunities I had were in life, being able to really pick and choose between things, but also to see how a very, very poor person can really have their confidence dramatically changed by something as simple as a loan that allows her to sort of use her own creativity to help her family along. And so that experience made me really want to write something about the Grameen Bank, but then that kind of led me on this whole pathway of exploring how people build organizations that can bring change in the world. And the reason why I said I think we're living in an extraordinary historical moment is because when you fast forward today, which is 20 years later from when I graduated, we are living through, and I've used this term before, a kind of enlightenment, I think. And when I say that, I'm actually speaking with an analogy to the actual Enlightenment, which was to say that what happened during the Enlightenment was there was this move from fantastical or sort of magical thinking about the way things work to this sort of rational approach to problem solving, the scientific method and so forth. And what we're now seeing today in many, many different fields is this amazing notion that we actually can solve some of our most intractable social problems. We may be able to eradicate world hunger. We may be able to completely get rid of homelessness in the United States. Not right away, but the question is, are we actually getting better at it? We may be able to dramatically do better on things like deforestation. I mean, how many people here know that since 2007, the rate of deforestation in the Amazon has dropped by 75%? Put up your hand if you knew that. Good for you. So, and how did that happen? Well, that's pretty significant. Whether that, we don't know if that will continue, but that's dramatic. In the United States, we have an approach towards homelessness, which is led by an organization called Common Ground, which is scientifically identifying the most needy people on the streets in the United States based on the probability that they will die on the streets, identifying them one by one, going around from city to city, creating what they call vulnerability indexes, and then pulling together private sector partners, public partners, and volunteers and nonprofit organizations to immediately house those people in housing programs that have been proven to actually work for people, which is to say that these people are able to actually stay in the housing and use fewer services and be sort of have their lives more stable. So an organization called Common Ground has created something called the 100,000 Homes Campaign, which is a campaign to take 100,000 of approximately 125,000 chronically homeless people in the United States off the streets and into housing by July 2013. So this is a deadline. They're now up to about 8,000 people. So they're slightly below their sort of the marker that they have to be at to reach 100,000. I think they have about 70 communities that are now participating in this. And it's a completely different approach than what we have been taking for the past, say, 30 or 40 years in the war on poverty. If you look at, for example, what's happening with water around the world, how many people here are interested in working on the water problem? You know, because that is such a huge sanitation health problem globally. So I interviewed this guy named Gary White, who's started an organization initially called Water Partners. It's now called water.org. And you can imagine how long he's been working on the water problem if his URL is water.org. He was there at the outset. And so what happened with Gary? It's a very interesting story. He, fresh out of engineering school in the early '80s, he actually while he was still I think a junior or a sophomore, he went to I think it was initially Central America and then later the Philippines to work on water projects, which is to say to drop wells, you know, to get fresh water to poor people. And when he was in these villages, he would see and speak with parents whose children had died from waterborne diseases, usually below the age of 3, in many cases, in almost all cases below the age of 5.